Ethan, an 8-year-old boy with a strong sense of right and wrong, always believed in protecting those he loved, no matter how hard it was. One day, on what was supposed to be the happiest day of his father's life, Ethan makes a decision that changes everything. As he watches his dad about to marry Emily, a woman who has been hiding dark secrets, Ethan steps forward to reveal a shocking truth that no one could have imagined. His bold move stops the wedding in its tracks, but what happens next leaves everyone stunned. Why did Ethan's revelation lead to such dramatic consequences? How did this young boy's courage uncover the truth about his father's fiancée, and what ripple effects did it have on their lives? Stay tuned to find out. And before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today. And if this story of bravery and honesty resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. The sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of the small chapel, casting a warm glow on the assembled guests. The air buzzed with excitement as friends and family members chatted in hushed tones, their eyes darting expectantly towards the entrance. At the altar, David Matthews stood tall in his crisp black tuxedo, a nervous smile playing on his lips as he waited for his bride-to-be. "You look great, Dad," whispered 8-year-old Ethan, fidgeting with the small pillow in his hands. The boy's dark curls were neatly combed, and his miniature suit matched his father's perfectly. But while David beamed with joy, Ethan's brown eyes were clouded with worry. David glanced down at his son and gave him a reassuring wink. "Thanks, buddy. You're the best ring bearer a dad could ask for." He ruffled Ethan's hair affectionately, oblivious to the anxiety etched across the child's face. As the first notes of the wedding march filled the air, the congregation rose to their feet. All eyes turned towards the chapel doors, eager to catch a glimpse of the bride. All eyes except Ethan's. The boy's gaze remained fixed on his father, his small hands clutching the ring pillow so tightly his knuckles turned white. The doors swung open, revealing Emily in all her bridal glory. She glided down the aisle, a vision in white lace and silk. Her golden hair cascaded over her shoulders in soft waves, and her blue eyes sparkled with emotion. As she approached the altar, David's face lit up with pure adoration. "You look beautiful," David whispered as Emily took her place beside him. She smiled back, her voice barely audible. "I can't wait to start our life together." The officiant began the ceremony, his words washing over the attendees. But for Ethan, each passing moment felt like an eternity. He shifted from foot to foot, his eyes darting between his father and Emily. To anyone watching, it might have seemed like simple nervousness, but there was something deeper, more urgent in the boy's demeanor. As he stood there, young Ethan found himself lost in memories of the past few months. His mind drifted back to the day his father, David, first introduced him to Emily. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when David had picked Ethan up from school, his face beaming with excitement. "I've got someone special I want you to meet, buddy," he had said, practically bouncing in his seat as they drove home. Ethan remembered how his stomach had twisted with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Since his mother's passing 2 years ago, it had just been him and his dad. The thought of someone new entering their lives filled him with uncertainty. When they arrived home, Emily was waiting on the porch, her golden hair catching the late afternoon sunlight. She smiled warmly as they approached, and Ethan couldn't help but notice how his father's eyes lit up at the sight of her. "Ethan, this is Emily," David had said, his voice filled with pride. She's become very important to me, and I hope she'll become important to you too." Emily had knelt down to Ethan's level, her blue eyes twinkling. "It's so nice to finally meet you, Ethan," she'd said softly. "Your dad talks about you all the time." In that moment, Ethan had felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. But as the weeks passed, that hope began to fade. Ethan noticed how different Emily was when his father wasn't around. The warm smiles disappeared, replaced by cold stares and tight-lipped frowns. One particular evening stood out in Ethan's mind. David had been working late, and Emily was supposed to watch Ethan. As they sat at the dinner table, Ethan tried to engage her in conversation. "Miss Emily," he'd started hesitantly, "do you like space? We're learning about the solar system in school." And Ethan. Emily cut him off sharply, not looking up from her phone. I'm busy right now. Eat your dinner quietly, please. Ethan had shrunk back in his chair, pushing his food around his plate. The silence that followed was deafening. When David was home, however, it was a different story entirely. Emily would ask Ethan about school, laugh at his jokes, and even ruffle his hair affectionately. But Ethan could see the falseness in her smile, the strain behind her eyes. David, on the other hand, was happier than Ethan had seen him in years. He practically floated around the house, humming to himself and breaking into random bouts of dancing that would have embarrassed Ethan if they weren't so nice to see. "Isn't Emily wonderful?" David would often say, his eyes twinkling. "We're so lucky to have her in our lives, aren't we, buddy?" Ethan would nod and force a smile, not wanting to burst his father's bubble of happiness. But inside, he felt increasingly alone and confused. As the weeks turned into months, Emily's true nature became more apparent to Ethan. She began to make subtle, cutting remarks when David wasn't within earshot. "Oh, Ethan," she'd sigh, eyeing the mess he'd made while working on a school project, "you're such a handful sometimes. I don't know how your father manages." Or when he'd excitedly show her a good grade on a test. "That's nice, dear. But you know, there's always room for improvement." Each comment chipped away at Ethan's self-esteem, making him feel like a burden in his own home. He began to withdraw, spending more time in his room and less time in the common areas of the house. One Saturday afternoon, about 3 months before the wedding, an incident occurred that Ethan couldn't shake from his memory. David had gone out to run some errands, leaving Ethan and Emily alone in the house. Ethan was in the living room, watching cartoons and sipping a glass of juice, when Emily walked in. "Turn that off," she snapped, gesturing to the TV. "It's too loud. I'm trying to work." Startled, Ethan fumbled with the remote. In his haste, he knocked over his glass, spilling juice all over the coffee table and carpet. "I'm sorry," he cried, jumping up to grab some napkins. "I didn't mean to dash." Before he could finish, Emily was there, her fingers digging into his arm as she yanked him away from the mess. "Look what you've done," she hissed, her face twisted with anger. "You clumsy, careless boy." Ethan winced at her grip, tears springing to his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whimpered. "I'll clean it up, I promise." Emily's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You better," she growled. "And if you breathe a word of this to your father, you'll be very, very sorry. Do you understand me?" Ethan nodded frantically, his heart pounding in his chest. As soon as Emily released him, he rushed to clean up the spill, his hands shaking the entire time. That night, when David returned home, Emily greeted him with a kiss and a cheerful, "How was your day, honey?" Ethan watched from the stairs, rubbing his arm where Emily had grabbed him, feeling more alone than ever. As the wedding drew nearer, Ethan found himself struggling with the weight of his secret. He wanted desperately to tell his father about Emily's true nature, but fear held him back. What if David didn't believe him? What if it made Emily even angrier? One evening, about a month before the wedding, Ethan finally worked up the courage to approach his father. David was in his study, going over some paperwork, when Ethan knocked timidly on the door. "Come in, buddy," David called out, smiling as Ethan entered. "What's up?" Ethan hesitated, twisting the hem of his shirt in his hands. "Dad," he began slowly, "can I talk to you about something?" David set aside his papers, giving Ethan his full attention. "Of course, son. You can talk to me about anything. What's on your mind?" Taking a deep breath, Ethan blurted out, "It's about Emily. I don't think she likes me very much." David's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean, Ethan?" "Emily adores you." "No, Dad, she doesn't," Ethan insisted, his words tumbling out in a rush. "She's different when you're not around. She ignores me, and sometimes she says mean things and dash." "Whoa, slow down," David interrupted, holding up a hand. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Ethan, I know this is a big change for you. It's natural to feel a little unsure about Emily becoming a part of our family. But I promise you, she cares about you very much." "But Dad dash," Ethan tried again, but David shook his head. "No buts, buddy. Emily is going to be your stepmother, and I need you to give her a chance. She's trying her best, just like we all are." "Okay." Ethan's shoulders slumped in defeat. "Okay, Dad," he mumbled, turning to leave the room. "Hey." David called after him, his voice softening. I love you, kiddo. We're all going to be just fine, you'll see. As Ethan closed the door behind him, he felt a wave of hopelessness wash over him. His father, the person he trusted most in the world, hadn't believed him. Or worse, hadn't wanted to believe him. From that day on, Ethan stopped trying to tell his father about Emily's behavior. Instead, he retreated further into himself, becoming quieter and more withdrawn. He began to dread family dinners and outings, knowing that he'd have to pretend everything was fine while silently enduring Emily's subtle jabs and cold shoulder. David, caught up in the whirlwind of wedding preparations and his own happiness, failed to notice the change in his son. He attributed Ethan's quietness to shyness or perhaps a phase, never suspecting the turmoil brewing beneath the surface. Emily, for her part, seemed to revel in her victory. With David oblivious to her true nature and Ethan too afraid to speak up again, she became bolder in her mistreatment of the boy. One afternoon, Ethan overheard a conversation between Emily and her friend Sarah. I don't know how you do it, Sarah was saying. Playing mom to someone else's kid? I couldn't handle it. Ethan froze in the hallway, holding his breath to hear Emily's response. Oh, it's not so bad, Emily replied, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Well, he's part of the package, isn't he? You have to take the good with the bad. Sarah laughed. You're a saint, I swear. If it were me, I'd have shipped the kid off to boarding school by now. Ethan didn't wait to hear Emily's response. He crept back to his room, his appetite forgotten, feeling like he'd been punched in the gut. Part of the package. The bad. Was that all he was to Emily? An inconvenience she had to tolerate to be with his dad? As the wedding day approached, Ethan felt increasingly trapped. He watched as his father and Emily made plans for their future, barely considering how it would affect him. When they discussed honeymoon destinations or redecorating the house, Ethan felt like a ghost, invisible and unimportant. One night, Ethan tossed and turned in his bed, unable to sleep. The digital clock on his nightstand blinked 11:42 p.m., its red glow casting eerie shadows across his room. Sighing, he decided to get a glass of water from the kitchen. As he padded down the hallway in his Superman pajamas, Ethan froze. A hushed, angry voice drifted from the living room. It was Emily. Mark, you need to listen to me, she hissed into her phone. Ethan crouched low, peering around the corner. Emily paced back and forth, her free hand raking through her disheveled blonde hair. We can't rush this. Everything has to be perfect. Ethan's heart raced. He'd never heard Emily sound so agitated before. Usually, she was all smiles and sweetness, especially around his dad. The wedding is in 2 weeks, Emily continued, her voice dripping with frustration. Once that's done, we move on to phase 2. Yes, the insurance policy. David doesn't suspect a thing. Insurance policy? Phase 2. Ethan's young mind whirled with confusion. He knew eavesdropping was wrong, but he couldn't tear himself away. Look, Mark, I've got it under control, Emily snapped. Just stick to the plan. Once we get the money, we'll be set for life. No more scams, no more close calls. This is our ticket out. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Money? Scams? What was Emily talking about? That brat Ethan is the wild card, Emily growled, causing Ethan to flinch. He's too observant for his own good. But don't worry, I can handle him. David is wrapped around my finger. He'd never believe a word against his precious fiancée. Tears pricked at Ethan's eyes. He'd always known Emily didn't like him, but hearing her talk about him like this, it hurt more than he could have imagined. Just be ready, Emily said, her tone final. 2 weeks after the wedding, we strike. David won't know what hit him. With that, she ended the call. Ethan scrambled back to his room, his heart pounding so loud he was sure Emily would hear it. He dove under his covers, mind racing with what he'd just overheard. Emily was planning something bad, and it involved his dad, money, and some kind of insurance policy. Ethan didn't understand it all, but he knew one thing for certain. His father was in danger. Sleep eluded Ethan that night. He tossed and turned, replaying Emily's words in his head. When morning came, he stumbled bleary-eyed to the breakfast table, where David and Emily sat, the picture of domestic bliss. Morning, champ. David said cheerfully, ruffling Ethan's hair. "You look tired. Rough night?" Ethan nodded, avoiding Emily's gaze. "Just couldn't sleep," he mumbled. Emily's saccharine voice cut through the air. "Oh, poor thing. Probably just excited about the wedding. Aren't you, Ethan?" Ethan looked up, meeting Emily's eyes. For a split second, he saw a flash of something cold and calculating behind her smile. It sent a shiver down his spine. "Yeah," he lied, forcing a smile. "Excited." Over the next few days, Ethan watched Emily like a hawk. Now that he knew something was amiss, he started noticing things he'd overlooked before. Emily was constantly on her phone, typing furiously. Whenever David entered the room, she'd quickly lock the screen, plastering on a smile. "Just chatting with the wedding planner, honey," she'd say, or, "Oh, bridesmaid drama." But Ethan knew better. He'd catch glimpses of her screen sometimes. Rapid-fire text to someone saved as M in her contacts. Mark, he assumed, the mysterious man from the phone call. Emily's absences from the house became more frequent too. She'd make flimsy excuses to leave, often for hours at a time. Just popping out to finalize some wedding details, she'd chirp, kissing David on the cheek. Or meeting the girls for a last-minute dress fitting. David, blinded by love and preoccupied with work, never questioned her. But Ethan noticed. He noticed everything now. One afternoon, about a week before the wedding, Ethan was helping David in the garage when Emily's car pulled into the driveway. She hurried inside, not even glancing their way. "I'm going to get a snack, Dad," Ethan said, wiping his greasy hands on a rag. David nodded, engrossed in fixing the lawnmower. "Sure thing, buddy. Bring me a soda while you're at it, will you?" Ethan entered the house quietly, hearing Emily's muffled voice from upstairs. He crept up the stairs, careful to avoid the creaky third step. "Almost there, Mark," Emily was saying. She was in the guest room. Soon to be her and David's room after the wedding. "Just a few more days. Keep your shirt on." Ethan inched closer to the door, straining to hear. "The policy is ironclad," Emily continued. "Once we're married, it'll be easy. A tragic accident, a grieving widow, and we're set for life. Just stick to the plan." Ethan's blood ran cold. A tragic accident? Were they planning to hurt his dad? Suddenly, Emily's voice dropped to a whisper. Ethan leaned in, trying to catch her words. In his eagerness, he bumped against the door, causing it to creak slightly. The room went silent. Ethan's heart leaped into his throat. "I've got to go," Emily said quickly. "I'll call you later." Ethan scrambled back down the hallway, ducking into the bathroom just as the guest room door opened. He heard Emily's footsteps pause outside the bathroom, then slowly descend the stairs. Breathing heavily, Ethan slumped against the bathroom wall. This was worse than he'd imagined. Emily and this Mark person weren't just after money. They were planning to hurt his dad. Maybe even. Ethan couldn't bring himself to finish the thought. He had to do something, but who would believe him? His dad thought Emily hung the moon, and Emily had made it clear that she could twist anything Ethan said against him. For the next few days, Ethan was on high alert. He watched Emily's every move, trying to piece together her plan. She was careful, but sometimes she slipped up. One evening, Ethan walked into the study to find Emily hurriedly closing David's laptop. She jumped when she saw him, a guilty look flashing across her face. "Oh, Ethan," she said, her voice overly bright. "You startled me. I was just checking some wedding RSVPs." Ethan nodded, not believing a word. As soon as Emily left the room, he went to the laptop. It was locked, but Ethan knew his dad's password. It was Ethan's birthday. The browser history had been cleared, but one tab remained open, the website for a major life insurance company. Ethan's stomach churned. This must be the policy, Emily kept mentioning. He was about to dig deeper when he heard footsteps approaching. Quickly, he closed the laptop and pretended to be looking at the bookshelf. David walked in, smiling when he saw Ethan. "Hey, sport. What you up to?" "Just looking for a book," Ethan lied, hating how easy it was becoming to deceive his father. David ruffled his hair affectionately. "That's my boy, always with his nose in a book. Come on, dinner's ready." As they walked to the dining room, Ethan's mind raced. He had to find a way to stop Emily. But how? The next day, Ethan got his chance. David had a last-minute meeting at work, and Emily was out on one of her mysterious errands. Ethan was alone in the house. With shaking hands, he opened Emily's sleek silver laptop. It was password protected, of course. Ethan tried a few guesses. Her birthday, the wedding date, but nothing worked. Just as he was about to give up, he noticed a yellow sticky note poking out from under the laptop. Peeling it back, he saw a string of numbers and letters. Could it be? Heart pounding, Ethan typed in the code. The laptop sprang to life. Ethan's eyes widened as he scrolled through Emily's files. There were dozens of documents with suspicious names, David's schedule, policy details. He clicked on one labeled insurance policy. A PDF opened, full of legal jargon Ethan couldn't understand. But a few phrases jumped out at him. Accidental death, double indemnity, payout of $5 million. $5 million. Was that what his dad's life was worth to Emily? Ethan's hands shook as he continued searching. He found a folder labeled Mark and opened it. Inside were dozens of photos of a man he'd never seen before, tall, dark-haired, with a scar above his left eyebrow. In some photos, he was alone. In others, he was with Emily, looking very much like a couple. Ethan felt sick. Not only was Emily planning to hurt his dad, but she was cheating on him too. Suddenly, he heard a car in the driveway. Emily was back. In a panic, Ethan closed all the windows and shut down the laptop. He had just managed to replace it exactly as he'd found it when the front door opened. "Ethan?" Emily called. "Are you here?" "Yeah," he called back, trying to keep his voice steady. "Just doing homework." Emily appeared in the doorway, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. "In the study? Don't you usually work in your room?" Ethan shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "It's quieter here." Emily stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Well, don't work too hard. Dinner will be ready soon." As she turned to leave, Ethan caught a glimpse of her phone screen. She was texting someone. The contact name was simply M. That night, as Ethan lay in bed, his mind whirled with everything he'd discovered. Emily and Mark were planning to kill his dad for the insurance money. They were going to wait until after the wedding, then stage some kind of accident. Ethan felt overwhelmed. He was just a kid. How was he supposed to stop two grown-ups from carrying out their evil plan? And with the wedding just days away, time was running out. He thought about telling his dad everything, but would David believe him? Emily had spent months painting Ethan as a jealous, difficult child. Would his dad trust him over the woman he was about to marry? As he tossed and turned, Ethan made a decision. He couldn't just sit back and let this happen. Somehow, some way, he had to stop this wedding. He had to save his dad. With that resolve, Ethan finally drifted off to sleep. In his dreams, he saw Emily and the man from the photos, Mark, laughing over a grave. His father's grave. Ethan woke up with a start, drenched in sweat. The dim light of dawn was just beginning to creep through his window. In that moment, as the remnants of his nightmare clung to him, Ethan knew what he had to do. He would stop this wedding, no matter what it took. Now back at the wedding, as the officiant began to speak, his words washing over Ethan in a meaningless jumble. All he could focus on was the growing panic in his chest, the knowledge that he had to do something, say something before it was too late. If anyone can show just cause why this couple cannot lawfully be joined together in matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The traditional words hung in the air. This was it. This was Ethan's chance. But fear paralyzed him. What if he was wrong? What if no one believed him? What if he ruined everything for nothing? The officiant nodded, about to continue. Ethan's heart pounded in his ears. It was now or never. Wait! The word burst from Ethan's lips before he could stop it. Stop the wedding. A collective gasp rippled through the church. All eyes turned to Ethan, who stood trembling, his small voice echoing in the sudden silence. "Ethan?" David turned to his son, confusion and concern etched on his face. "What's wrong, buddy?" Ethan's eyes darted from his father to Emily, who was staring at him with a mixture of shock and barely concealed anger. "Dad," Ethan's voice quavered, but he pressed on. "You can't marry her. She's not who you think she is." David knelt down, placing a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder. What are you talking about, son? Are you feeling okay? Ethan shook his head vehemently. No, Dad, you don't understand. Emily, she's been lying to you. She's planning something bad. A murmur ran through the crowd. Emily let out a nervous laugh, her eyes darting between David and the guests. Oh, sweetie, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I know this is a big change for you. It's okay to feel scared about having a new mom, but this isn't the way to express it. Ethan felt a surge of anger at her patronizing tone. No, he shouted. That's not at all. I heard you on the phone with Mark. I know about the insurance policy. You're planning to hurt Dad. The church fell deathly silent. David's face paled, his eyes wide with disbelief. Ethan, that's a very serious accusation. Where did you hear such a thing? I overheard her, Dad, Ethan pleaded. Late at night, she was talking to someone named Mark. They were talking about money and insurance and how they were going to get rid of you after the wedding. Emily's laugh was higher-pitched now, a note of hysteria creeping in. David, honey, you can't possibly believe this. It's ridiculous. Mark is my wedding planner. Of course we've been talking about insurance for the ceremony and money for the caterers and flowers. Ethan must have misunderstood. But Ethan wasn't backing down. No, that's not true. I saw the insurance policy on your computer. It was for millions of dollars if Dad dies. And I found pictures of you with Mark. He's not just your wedding planner. The crowd was in an uproar now. Guests whispered furiously to each other, some looking scandalized, others concerned. David stood frozen, looking back and forth between his son and his bride-to-be. Emily's face had lost its color, her composed mask slipping. David, she said, reaching for his hand. You know me. You know I would never. This is absurd. Ethan is just a child. He doesn't understand what he's saying. David's brow furrowed, clearly torn. Ethan, he said slowly, these are very serious things you're saying. Are you absolutely sure about what you heard and saw? Ethan nodded vigorously, tears welling in his eyes. I'm sure, Dad. I wouldn't lie about this. Emily's been mean to me for months, but only when you're not around. She makes me feel bad all the time, and now she's planning to hurt you. Please, Dad, you have to believe me. David's face was a storm of emotions, confusion, hurt, disbelief. He turned to Emily, his voice low and strained. Emily, is there any truth to this? Any at all? Emily's composure cracked. Her eyes darted around the church, taking in the shocked faces of the guests, the stern look of the officiant, the pleading eyes of Ethan. For a moment, she looked like a cornered animal. Then, in a blink, her demeanor changed. Her eyes hardened, her mouth set in a grim line. This is ridiculous, she spat. I don't have to stand here and be accused by a spoiled brat who can't handle sharing his daddy's attention. She turned to the stunned crowd. I'm sorry you all had to witness this tantrum. Clearly, Ethan has some issues we need to address as a family. David, perhaps we should postpone Dash. But David cut her off, his voice quiet but firm. No, Emily. I think we need to address this now. Because if there's even a shred of truth to what Ethan's saying, Emily's eyes flashed dangerously. You can't be serious. You're going to believe the wild imaginings of an 8-year-old over me? Your fiancée? The woman you love? David's face was troubled. I love my son too, Emily. And Ethan's never lied to me before. He's not the type to make up stories, especially not something like this. Ethan felt a surge of relief. His dad was listening to him, but Emily wasn't done yet. This is absurd, she cried, her voice rising. I've done nothing but love you, David. I'll try to be a mother to Ethan. And this is how I'm repaid? With baseless accusations and suspicion. She turned to Ethan, her eyes blazing. You little brat, she hissed, forgetting herself for a moment. You've ruined everything. A collective gasp went up from the audience. David's eyes widened in shock at Emily's outburst. In that moment, he saw a side of her he'd never witnessed before, and it chilled him to the bone. Emily, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. What have you done? Emily seemed to realize her mistake. She backpedaled quickly, forcing a laugh. Oh, David, can't you see? This stress, it's all too much. Ethan's outburst, these ridiculous accusations. I just lost my temper for a moment. Surely you can understand. But the damage was done. David took a step back, his eyes never leaving Emily's face. No, he said slowly. No, I don't think I can understand. Because the Emily I thought I knew would never speak to my son that way, no matter how upset she was. He turned to Ethan, kneeling down to look his son in the eye. Ethan, I need you to tell me everything. From the beginning. Don't leave anything out. And so, with all eyes upon him, Ethan began to speak. He told his father about Emily's cold behavior when they were alone, the cruel comments, and the physical intimidation. He recounted the overheard phone conversation, the suspicious absences, the secret messages to him. He described finding the insurance policy on Emily's computer and the photos of her with Mark. As Ethan spoke, David's face grew increasingly pale. The guests listened in stunned silence, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others nodding as if pieces of a puzzle were falling into place. Emily stood rigid, her eyes darting between David and the exit. As Ethan's story unfolded, her composed facade crumbled completely. By the time he finished, she looked like a completely different person from the radiant bride who had walked down the aisle just minutes before. "Is this true?" David asked, his voice heavy with pain and betrayal. "Emily, look me in the eye and tell me none of this is true." Emily's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Her eyes, once full of false warmth, now held only cold calculation. In that moment, David saw the truth, and it broke his heart. "I think," David said, his voice shaking slightly, "that this wedding is over." A commotion broke out in the church. Guests began to stand, some moving towards the exits, others crowding closer to hear what was happening. In the chaos, Emily saw her chance. With a snarl of frustration, she turned and bolted down the aisle, her white dress billowing behind her. She pushed past shocked guests, making a beeline for the church doors. "Stop her!" someone shouted. But Emily was quick. She burst through the doors and out into the bright sunlight, leaving behind a scene of utter chaos. The church erupted into chaos as Emily fled, her white dress billowing behind her like a ghostly apparition. David, still reeling from the shocking revelations, snapped into action. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. "Yes, hello? I need to report a crime," David said, his voice trembling. "My fiancée, she was planning to kill me for insurance money. She just ran from our wedding. Please, you need to find her." As David spoke to the dispatcher, providing Emily's description and last known direction, Ethan stood rooted to the spot, overwhelmed by the tumultuous events he had set in motion. A mix of relief and anxiety churned in his stomach. He had saved his father, but at what cost? The guests, a moment ago seated in reverent silence for a joyous occasion, now buzzed with shock and speculation. Some rushed outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of the fleeing bride. Others huddled in small groups, whispering furiously and casting furtive glances at David and Ethan. David ended the call and turned to his son, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. He knelt down, placing his hands on Ethan's shoulders. "Ethan," he said, his voice hoarse, "I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you sooner. I should have seen." Ethan threw his arms around his father's neck, burying his face in David's shoulder. "It's okay, Dad," he mumbled, his voice muffled. "I'm just glad you're safe." David hugged his son tightly, tears welling in his eyes. For a moment, the chaos around them faded away, and it was just father and son, united against the storm. Their moment was interrupted by the arrival of the police. 2 officers entered the church, their presence immediately commanding attention. The murmur of voices died down as everyone turned to watch. "Mr. Matthews?" one of the officers asked, approaching David and Ethan. David stood, keeping one hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Yes, that's me. I'm Officer Johnson. This is my partner, Officer Rivera," the policeman said. "We need to ask you some questions about what happened here." As David began recounting the events to the officers, Ethan's attention was drawn to a commotion near the church entrance. A tall man with dark hair and a scar above his left eyebrow was trying to push his way inside, looking frantic. Ethan's heart leaped into his throat. He recognized the man from the photos he'd seen on Emily's computer. It was Mark. "Dad," Ethan whispered urgently, tugging on David's sleeve. "Dad, that's him. That's Mark." David's head snapped up, following Ethan's gaze. His eyes widened in recognition, remembering the description Ethan had given earlier. "Officers," David said quickly. "That man by the door. I think he's involved in this. He's the one my son overheard Emily talking to on the phone." The officers reacted swiftly. Officer Johnson stayed with David and Ethan, while Officer Rivera moved quickly towards Mark, who was now trying to back out of the church. "Sir, stop right there," Officer Rivera called out. Mark froze for a split second, his eyes darting around like a cornered animal. Then, in a burst of panic, he turned and ran. Officer Rivera gave chase, shouting into his radio for backup. The wedding guests watched in stunned silence as the officer disappeared through the church doors in pursuit of the mysterious man. "Mr. Matthews," Officer Johnson said, his voice calm but authoritative, "I think it would be best if you and your son came down to the station to give a full statement. We'll need to gather all the evidence you have regarding Ms. Emily's plans." David nodded, still looking shell-shocked. "Of course, whatever you need. Ethan, buddy, are you okay to go with us to the police station?" Ethan nodded bravely, though his heart was racing. "Yeah, Dad. I want to help." As they prepared to leave, David's best man, Jack, approached them. "Dave," he said, placing a comforting hand on his friend's shoulder. "What do you want us to do about all this?" He gestured vaguely at the church full of confused and concerned guests. David ran a hand through his hair, looking overwhelmed. I don't know, Jack. I guess. Tell everyone to go home? Apologize on my behalf? I can't deal with this right now." Jack nodded understandingly. "Don't worry about it, man. I'll take care of everything here. You just focus on you and Ethan, okay?" David managed a weak smile. "Thanks, Jack. I don't know what I'd do without you." As David and Ethan left the church with Officer Johnson, they could hear Jack addressing the crowd, his voice steady and reassuring as he explained the situation and asked everyone to return home. The ride to the police station was surreal. Ethan sat in the back of the police car, watching the familiar streets of his hometown pass by in a blur. Everything looked the same, and yet everything had changed. His father sat beside him, uncharacteristically quiet, his eyes unfocused as he stared out the window. At the station, David and Ethan were led to a small, plain room with a table and a few chairs. Officer Johnson assured them it wasn't an interrogation room, just a quiet place where they could talk without interruptions. For the next few hours, David and Ethan recounted their experiences with Emily. Ethan described the overheard phone conversations, the cruel treatment when David wasn't around, and his discovery of the insurance policy and photos on Emily's computer. David, still looking shell-shocked, filled in the gaps with details about his relationship with Emily, trying to pinpoint when things might have started to go wrong. As they talked, more pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Emily had suggested increasing David's life insurance policy just a month after they got engaged, citing concerns about Ethan's future if anything were to happen to David. She had also been pushing for them to take up more dangerous hobbies together. Rock climbing, skydiving, even swimming with sharks on their honeymoon. "I thought she was just adventurous," David said, his voice hollow. "I never imagined." Ethan reached out and took his father's hand, squeezing it reassuringly. David managed a small smile, grateful for his son's unwavering support. As the day wore on, more information trickled in. Officer Rivera had managed to apprehend Mark a few blocks from the church. Under questioning, he had quickly cracked, revealing the full extent of the plan he and Emily had concocted. Emily, it turned out, was not even her real name. She was actually Sarah Connors, a con artist with a long history of seducing wealthy men and then disappearing with their money. Mark was her longtime partner, both in crime and in life. They had been pulling these scams for years, but had never attempted anything as ambitious or as deadly as their plan for David. The insurance policy Ethan had discovered was just the tip of the iceberg. Emily, or Sarah, had been systematically isolating David from his friends and family, subtly manipulating him into changing his will to leave everything to her. The plan had been to stage an accident on their honeymoon, collect the insurance money and David's estate, and then disappear to start a new life together. As the full scope of Emily's deception became clear, David seemed to crumple in on himself. How could I have been so blind? He whispered, more to himself than to Ethan or the officers. How could I not have seen what was happening? Officer Johnson, who had been quietly taking notes, looked up with sympathy. Mr. Matthews, don't blame yourself. These people are professionals. They've done this before, and they're very good at manipulating others. The important thing is that they didn't succeed, thanks to your son. David looked at Ethan, a mix of pride and lingering guilt in his eyes. You're right, he said softly. Ethan saved my life today. I wish I had listened to him sooner. Ethan, feeling a surge of love for his father, leaned into David's side. It's okay, Dad. We're okay now. As the day turned to evening, there was still no sign of Emily. She seemed to have vanished into thin air after fleeing the church. The police assured David and Ethan that they were doing everything they could to find her, but warned them that she was experienced in disappearing. We've put out an APB and alerted all local and state law enforcement, Officer Johnson explained. We're also monitoring airports, bus stations, and car rental agencies. But I have to be honest with you, she had a head start, and she knows how to cover her tracks. David nodded wearily. I understand. Thank you for everything you're doing. As they prepared to leave the station, Officer Johnson handed David his card. If you remember anything else, or if Ms. Khan, if Emily tries to contact you, please call me immediately, day or night. David pocketed the card, then turned to Ethan. Ready to go home, buddy? Ethan nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of the day's events. He was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. The drive home was quiet, both father and son lost in their thoughts. As they pulled into their driveway, David turned off the engine, but made no move to get out of the car. Ethan, he said softly, turning to face his son, I owe you an apology. A big one. Ethan looked at his father, surprised. For what, Dad? David sighed heavily. For not listening to you. For not seeing how Emily was treating you. For putting you in danger by bringing that woman into our lives. Ethan was quiet for a moment, considering his father's words. Then, with a wisdom beyond his years, he said, Dad, you were just trying to be happy. And make us happy. You couldn't have known what Emily was really like. David's eyes welled with tears. But I should have seen how she was affecting you. I should have noticed that you weren't happy. Ethan reached out and took his father's hand. I didn't want to ruin things for you. You seemed so happy with her. I thought maybe I was the problem. David's heart broke at his son's words. He pulled Ethan into a fierce hug, mindless of the awkward angle across the car seats. Never, Ethan. You could never be the problem. You're the best thing in my life, and I'm so sorry if I ever made you doubt that. They sat there for a long moment, holding each other, letting the tears flow freely. It was a catharsis, washing away the pain and fear of the past months. Finally, David pulled back, wiping his eyes. What do you say we go inside and order a ridiculous amount of pizza? I think we've earned it. Ethan managed a small smile. Can we get stuffed crust? David laughed, the sound a bit watery, but genuine. Buddy, after today, you can have whatever kind of pizza you want. As they walked into the house, both David and Ethan felt a weight lift from their shoulders. The specter of Emily, Sarah, still loomed, but they would face that together. For now, they were home, they were safe, and they had each other. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. David and Ethan's lives were turned upside down as they dealt with the aftermath of Emily's deception. There were more interviews with the police, meetings with lawyers to untangle the legal mess Emily had created, and endless calls from friends, family, and even reporters seeking details about the wedding day drama. David did his best to shield Ethan from the worst of it, but there was no escaping the reality of their situation. Emily remained at large, seemingly having vanished into thin air. The police kept David updated on their search, but as the days turned into weeks, hope of finding her began to fade. Mark, on the other hand, was facing the full force of the law. In exchange for a plea deal, he had provided a wealth of information about Emily's past cons and their network of associates. His testimony painted a picture of a sophisticated criminal operation that had been operating for years, leaving a trail of broken hearts and empty bank accounts across the country. For Ethan, The aftermath of the wedding day was a mix of relief and anxiety. He was glad that his father was safe and that Emily was out of their lives, but he couldn't shake the fear that she might return someday to seek revenge. David noticed his son's unease and did his best to reassure him. He installed a new security system in their home, complete with cameras and motion sensors. He also made sure that Ethan knew he could come to him with any concerns, no matter how small they might seem. "We're a team, buddy," David would say, ruffling Ethan's hair affectionately. "You and me against the world, remember?" Ethan would nod, feeling a little bit safer each time his father reaffirmed their bond. As the weeks passed, life slowly began to return to a semblance of normalcy. David threw himself into his work, taking on extra projects to keep his mind occupied. Ethan focused on school, finding comfort in the familiar routine of classes and homework. One Saturday morning, about a month after the ill-fated wedding, David and Ethan were having breakfast when the doorbell rang. David tensed, still wary of unexpected visitors, but relaxed when he saw Jack, his best man, through the peephole. "Hey man," Jack said as David opened the door. "How are you guys holding up?" David managed a tired smile. "We're hanging in there. Come on in." Jack followed David to the kitchen, where Ethan was finishing his cereal. "Hey little man," Jack said, giving Ethan a fist bump. "You doing okay?" Ethan nodded, returning the fist bump with a small smile. He had always liked Jack, who treated him like a person rather than just a kid. "So," Jack said, accepting a cup of coffee from David, "I actually came by for a reason. The guys and I have been talking, and we think it's time for you two to get out of the house for a bit. What do you say to a camping trip next weekend?" David hesitated, glancing at Ethan. "I don't know, Jack. With everything that's happened, that's exactly why you need this," Jack insisted. "Just a few days away from all this." He gestured vaguely around the kitchen. "No phones, no reporters, no lawyers. Just us guys, some tents, and the great outdoors." Ethan perked up at the idea. "Can we go fishing?" he asked, a spark of excitement in his eyes that David hadn't seen in weeks. Jack grinned. "You bet, buddy. We'll catch enough fish to feed an army." David looked at his son's hopeful face and felt something loosen in his chest. Maybe this was exactly what they needed, a chance to breathe, to remember what life was like before Emily came into their world. "All right," he said, smiling as Ethan's face lit up. "Let's do it." The camping trip turned out to be exactly what David and Ethan needed. Away from the constant reminders of Emily's betrayal, they found themselves relaxing for the first time in months. They spent their days hiking, fishing, and swapping stories around the campfire. Ethan delighted in learning how to set up a tent and roast the perfect marshmallow, while David rediscovered the simple joy of watching his son laugh and play without a care in the world. On their last night in the woods, as they sat around the dying embers of their campfire, David pulled Ethan close. "Thank you, buddy," he said softly. Ethan looked up at his father, confused. "For what, Dad?" David smiled, his eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. "For being you. For being brave when I couldn't see what was happening. For saving us both." Ethan snuggled closer to his father, feeling safe and loved. "We saved each other, Dad," he said wisely. As they drove home the next day, both David and Ethan felt renewed. The shadow of Emily still loomed in the background, but it no longer seemed all-consuming. They had weathered the storm together and come out stronger for it. Life continued to move forward. Ethan started a new school year, throwing himself into his studies and making new friends. David, with the encouragement of his therapist, began to cautiously dip his toes back into the dating pool, though he was understandably wary and took things very slowly. Then, 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, everything changed again. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Officer Johnson showed up at their door, his face grave. "Mr. Matthews," he said as David invited him in, "we've found Emily." David's heart raced. "You've arrested her?" Officer Johnson shook his head. "No, sir. I'm afraid. We found her body in a motel room just outside of Vegas. It appears she took her own life." The news hit David like a physical blow. David stumbled back, steadying himself against the wall. "She's dead?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Officer Johnson nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir. We believe she'd been there for a few days. There was a note." At that moment, Ethan came bounding down the stairs, stopping short when he saw the police officer. "Dad?" he asked, his voice tinged with worry. David turned to his son, his face pale. "Ethan, buddy, why don't you go to your room for a bit? I need to talk to Officer Johnson." Ethan hesitated, his eyes darting between his father and the officer. "Is it about Emily?" he asked softly. David sighed, realizing there was no point in hiding the truth from his perceptive son. "Yes, it is. Come here, buddy. We should talk about this together." As they sat in the living room, Officer Johnson gently explained the situation, careful to spare Ethan the more distressing details. Emily, or Sarah as she was truly named, had been on the run for months, always staying one step ahead of the law. But the pressure had taken its toll. In her note, Officer Johnson said, his voice softening, she expressed remorse for what she'd done. She said she couldn't live with the guilt anymore. David sat in stunned silence, his arm around Ethan's shoulders. The boy looked up at his father, his young face etched with concern. "Are you okay, Dad?" David managed a weak smile. I don't know, buddy. It's a lot to process." After Officer Johnson left, promising to keep them updated on any developments, David and Ethan sat together on the couch, both lost in thought. Ethan then asked, "Do you think she really felt bad about what she did?" David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, buddy. People are complicated. Sometimes they do bad things and then regret them later. But what's important is that we learn from this and move forward." The news of Emily's death marked a turning point for David and Ethan. While it brought a sense of closure, it also stirred up complex emotions that took time to process. They attended counseling sessions together, learning to navigate their feelings and strengthen their bond even further. As the months passed, life settled into a new normal. David threw himself into being the best father he could be, cherishing every moment with Ethan. He also rekindled old friendships that had fallen by the wayside during his relationship with Emily, rebuilding his support network. Ethan, for his part, blossomed. The weight of secrecy and fear lifted from his young shoulders. He became more outgoing at school and excelled in his studies. He developed a passion for detective novels, often joking that he had a head start in the mystery-solving department. On the one-year anniversary of the ill-fated wedding day, David and Ethan decided to start a new tradition. They packed a picnic and drove to a beautiful state park, spending the day hiking, fishing, and simply enjoying each other's company. As they sat by a crystal-clear lake, watching the sun set, David turned to his son. "You know, Ethan, I've been thinking a lot about what happened last year." Ethan looked up, curious. "Yeah?" David nodded, his eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. "I realized something important. What Emily did was terrible, but in a way, it taught me the most valuable lesson of my life." "What's that, Dad?" Ethan asked. David smiled, ruffling Ethan's hair affectionately. "It taught me that the most important relationship in my life, the one I should always prioritize, is right here." He poked Ethan gently in the chest. "You and me, buddy. We're a team, and nothing's ever going to change that." Ethan beamed, throwing his arms around his father in a tight hug. "I love you, Dad," he mumbled into David's chest. "I love you too, kiddo," David replied, his voice thick with emotion. "More than you'll ever know." As they packed up their picnic and headed home, both father and son felt a sense of peace settle over them. The past year had been a roller coaster of emotions, filled with betrayal, fear, and uncertainty. But it had also strengthened their bond in ways they never could have imagined. They had weathered the storm together, emerging stronger and closer than ever. And as they drove home, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, both David and Ethan knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The story of the black boy who stopped his dad's wedding had become a tale of resilience, love, and the unbreakable bond between a father and son. It was a reminder that sometimes the happiest endings come not from fairy tale weddings, but from the simple, profound love of family. As they pulled into their driveway, David looked over at Ethan, who had fallen asleep during the drive. He smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over him. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. With Ethan by his side, David knew they could handle anything life threw their way. And so, as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, David carried his sleeping son into the house, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring together. Ethan's courage and determination to do what was right not only changed his father's life, but also sent shockwaves through their entire community. By speaking up and revealing the truth about his father's fiancée, Ethan showed the power of bravery, no matter how young you are. His actions uncovered hidden truths, healed relationships, and reminded everyone that honesty and love should always come first. If Ethan's story touched you, be sure to subscribe for more heartwarming and inspiring stories. And before you go, we'd love to hear from you. How do you think you would have handled the situation if you were in Ethan's shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below.